You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. As Halloween draws near, the fourth and final episode for spooky season covers another subject I've never focused on before: cursed objects. Author J W Ocker joins me to dive into some interesting items that have allegedly caused death, destruction, fear and terror in all those who coveted or owned them. Jason and I dive into his experience of buying his own cursed item from eBay, the notorious Dybbuk Box, his trip to Zak Bagan's haunted museum in Las Vegas to see it firsthand, a haunting statue that found itself moving towards the site of the event that led to its creation, a mysterious ring that may have influenced one of the biggest selling authors ever, and much more. It was a thrill to discuss these cursed objects with Jason, and his book, Cursed Objects, is a marvellous collection and compendium of these strange and peculiar items. I hope you've all enjoyed these spooky specials, and with episode 150 coming up, I can assure you November sees the return of some popular guests, and some long overdue catch-ups. But before we get to our final Halloween instalment, don't forget you can support the show on Patreon by signing up for $4 a month, for ad-free episodes, early release dates and more. You can search on Patreon looking for Mysteries and Monsters, or click on the Patreon link in our show notes. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And don't forget, you can now get Mysteries and Monsters merchandise by going to mysteriesandmonsters.com and clicking the merchandise tabs at the top of the page. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr from the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. So then, are you brave enough to join me and J W Ocker on the hunt for some cursed objects? Many of us who find the paranormal fascinating will probably be aware of certain inanimate objects thought to be cursed or evil. From creepy dolls to items of jewellery, paintings to tombs, it seems nothing is safe from being cursed. Author J W Ocker has been brave enough to investigate a plethora of these damned items for his book, Cursed Objects for Our Benefit. Jason, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters, sir.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Now, you, as I'm sure people have said to you previously, Jason, you are either very brave or very stupid taking on a task such as this, my friend.
Yeah, I think the points scatter more toward the stupid side, honestly, between you and me.
Well, I was going to say you were brave, but I'm glad you said that, not I, sir. It's a fascinating subject, Jay, and I'm very interested in this because when I read your book, it was really refreshing to see a very balanced, tongue-in-cheek approach to this. Not that you're being dismissive about a lot of these things, but it's fascinating to see that there are so many of these objects, and it can be anything, it would seem, Jay, that can apparently become cursed from across the world. And I know often in the world of the paranormal, this kind of subject either gets people really excited or a deep sigh seems to emanate from them. So how have you found diving into this crazy world of cursed objects?
I found it to be really fascinating. In the whatever intro or prologue to the book, I make a case for why everybody should be interested in cursed objects, whether you believe in them or not. If you believe in them, you should be really interested in them because it's dangerous, right? Because you want to avoid cursed objects. It's like staying away from water if you can't swim. You want to have that kind of armament. If you don't believe in cursed objects, what reason why you should be interested in them is their stories. Their stories wrapped around objects, and they're much more palpable for that reason. Like anybody can tell a piece of folklore, right? It just kind of trails in the air. It's like maybe somebody writes about it. It's shut between covers in a library. But a cursed object is like an object. It's an object lesson, right? There's a thing in my hand. This is cursed, and now I'm going to tell you all of these stories. And I always kind of like use the Hope Diamond as an example of that, because the Hope Diamond's probably the most famous cursed object out there. Most like probably the icon of cursed objects in every way. And really, we wouldn't know, and wouldn't know most of the stories about its owners.
Yeah.
If it wasn't cursed, right? If the stories didn't say it was cursed, we would just know the Hope Diamond as rich people had it, royalty had it, and now a museum has it. But now we know like the intimate details of the lives of all the owners, all because it's a cursed object. So there's like reasons for everybody to enjoy, anybody that enjoys a story, to enjoy a cursed object. But what really kind of fascinated me once I got into it, because I knew that part, I knew stories are cool, right? We all know that. But once I got into it, the thing about cursed objects that you don't always get with other paranormal topics is parallel stories, right? So you have, because I dealt only with famous cursed objects, you have, these are usually artifacts that are in museums most of the time. That's what makes them famous. You have a parallel track of the cursed story, the supernatural story, but then you have this other track of the historical story. So you have, these objects are, most of them anyway, I'd say 99% of it are real. They're real things, right? Whether they're cursed or just objects, they're real objects. So you have definite like hundreds of years of history for the Hope Diamond, for, Otzi is thousands of years. And then on top of that, you have the cursed story, which makes it even more interesting. So there's just so many ways to like be excited by a cursed object that I wasn't knowledgeable of before I started this book, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the Hope Diamond is also the only cursed object that has a whole episode of In Search Of dedicated to it. I can't remember anything else that it kind of investigated to that level. And the Hope Diamond, as you say, is one of those that I've known about all my life, being interested in the paranormal, Jason. And it's interesting for me that when we look at the world of cursed objects, I think right now it's probably the most well-known this part of the paranormal has become. It seems to have really grown over the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I always tell the anecdote that, I'm huge into the paranormal. I'm not a believer, but I'm a massive fan. All pretty much all my life, I'm into like anything that's haunted or anything that's weird or anything that's like, doesn't stick to the rules of reality as we know them. I love those stories. But for some reason, cursed objects never really came onto my radar. I knew about them. Obviously, we all know about them. Just about every single movie is based on a cursed object. Something has to start the action in a horror movie. You know about them in general. Like, voodoo dolls and you know what cursed objects do. But I just didn't know. I don't know. I guess I just didn't think that they hadn't really been that nobody ever really put all of them together, all the famous ones together in one encyclopedia. You can go online and see a lot of top 10 lists. Yeah. But there was no real compendium of cursed objects. And, that surprised me and excited me as well, because I was like, oh, this is a huge opportunity. Or my publisher, actually, who came up with the idea, or my editor, I should say, she said, this is a huge opportunity to put these stories together in a way that they've never been put together before. And that was just exciting to me. And telling the histories and the cultural parts of them, and jumping between objects, telling the story of a diamond, then a chair, then a painting, then a email, right? It's just, I don't know, it's so much fun. I don't know, I shouldn't say I have fun with cursed objects, but somehow, despite kind of like the unnerving, sinister edge that they have, I had so much fun. But I'm also a guy who loves physical objects. I collect stuff. I like to be around physical sites. I like when I travel. I'm usually focused on something physical, whether it's a plaque or a natural object or something in a museum. So this ended up being like, even though I'd never thought about them as this prominent piece, it's ended up being like one of my favorite things I've done.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about this is, obviously, as you've come to create this project, you decided that the best way to kind of prove this, maybe more to us than you, was to actually go on eBay. I mean, I've done this myself, Jason, so I know exactly where you're coming from here. Is to go on eBay and look to pick yourself up a cursed object, because we can't always rely on yard sales to stumble across a haunted piano or a possessed wine cooler or something like that. And often, sometimes this is the funny thing about these things as well, people will often pick things up at yard sales that seem perfectly normal and then find out that there's a reason why it's been put up for sale. Right. So that section really made me chuckle, primarily because it is amazing now when you go on eBay and you put cursed objects in. There are literally thousands, aren't there?
Yeah, there is, which tells us that there's a market for them, right? That's why people sell things, is when there's a market for them. Yeah. So even though, again, going back to cursed objects having the sinister edge to them, and this reputation for ruining your life or ending it, one of the two. People want them. They want to collect them. They want to do things with them, display them. I don't know. I'm not even sure what all you do with cursed objects once you buy them, but people want them. And it's fascinating to me because my style of nonfiction is I have to be involved. I can't just read an encyclopedia of cursed objects. I have to go see some and talk about my experiences, and in that case, go to eBay and buy one just so I can have that feeling of unsettledness, because you do get it. Even as a non-believer, there were times when I was in that process, or when I'm going to visit one museum, where I'm like, what if I'm wrong? It almost doesn't matter what I believe if in the end I'm wrong. So bringing them into my house or holding them, it really makes you face that question, right? It's easy to be a skeptic from afar, put it that way. But when they're right in your face, you have to ask yourself some very troubling questions.
Indeed, and as you touched on earlier when we were talking about this, it's almost like the beginning of a film, Jason. Skeptic buys haunted object off eBay. What's the worst that could happen?
Exactly. It's the inciting incident. Almost just every single horror movie. It was funny when I did a sidebar in the book on horror movies about cursed objects. And there's a lot where the cursed object is the main star, right? It's the title of the movie or whatever. But really, almost every horror movie starts with something. You unlock a tomb, you find a rock, you open a box, you do something, and it unleashes the evil that the story is about. So almost every single horror movie, and many other types of movies for that matter, are cursed objects movies. So yeah, exactly right. What chain of events, what narrative am I starting just by hitting buy now on eBay or bid now or whatever?
Yeah, I've got a friend who, whenever he's moved house, he's always looked at the land registry to make sure his new house isn't built on a graveyard, because poltergeist affected him so much as a child, Jay, that he is paranoid now. But at the end of the day, especially in the UK, I don't think you can have a house that probably isn't built on a graveyard of some description through history.
No, I think you're right. No. In England, you guys are just layer and layer of history on history. So something bad happened under your house. Even if it's not a graveyard.
Sadly true. So I suppose the biggest challenge when you went onto eBay, Jay, was to try and firstly find something of a reasonable value, because some of the prices that, as you mentioned there, and I know firsthand, some of the prices that objects go for, they have reserve bids of $100, $200, $500, even $1,000 to start with. And as you say, there's clearly a market for it, because otherwise these objects would be going for $1 or $100 at most. But they're not.
Yep.
Clearly, there is an appetite for such things, regardless of the veracity of the claims attached to them. So for you, I suppose that one of the biggest difficulties you would have is trying to sort of churn through all these paintings and boxes and pictures and ornaments from far-flung lands.
Yeah, what I did, obviously at first, the first thing I did was just kind of scroll around, just to kind of get a sense of it, and to make sure this is possible. But what I did was I put together a set of rules for what the object needed to be for me. It needed to be cheap. That's true. I couldn't spend my entire advance on this one cursed object. The other thing had to be small. Even if I couldn't have something that would take up my entire study or become a centerpiece of my house. I didn't want anything like that.
Yeah.
Had to be aesthetically pleasing to me. I wanted to be able to, if things worked out, I wanted to be a memento of my time in cursed object land. So I wanted to be able to put it on my shelf with my other tchotchkes and say, yep, every time I see it, that represents that time I wrote that book. So it couldn't be like a doll, put it that way. I couldn't have a doll staring at me from my shelf, for the rest of my life. It couldn't be ugly. It couldn't be disturbing. It couldn't be, some of them are really kind of grody looking on purpose, right? Because they look like they just are evil. So I wanted something that wasn't in any of those things. And I eventually found it. It was it's like a 2-inch long brass bulldog paperweight that, is honestly still behind me as we talk right now. It's been there since I finished the book. Been there since halfway through the book. It's been there since I finished the book. Everything I've been through, I've had this cursed object kind of over my shoulder, watching me type about it.
Now, often, and I know one of the subjects you mentioned, the Newkirks in the book, and one of my favourite objects of theirs, and you mentioned this item in your chapter on them, or your section on them, which is the wonderfully named Billy the Idol. So I certainly get that joke of a man of a certain vintage.
Right.
Jay. So did you name your object? Did you give it a name, or was it just the cursed object that you purchased?
Oh, I totally named it. And the reason why I did that is because all the most interesting cursed objects have names, right? They aren't just the haunted chair or the haunted inn table, whatever it is. The best ones, the ones that have like real gravity to them, real gravitas, is they have names, right? So the Hope Diamond, that's the definite one, right?
Yep.
The Busby Stoop is another great one. So what I realized is I wanted to sound like, whatever I named this thing, I wanted to sound like it could be in the title of a Sherlock Holmes story, right? Sherlock Holmes and the curse of the whatever. So what I named it was The Cursed Cur, right? Because whatever, I like alliteration, but it also sounds like one of those titles, right? Sherlock Holmes in the case of the Cursed Cur. Perfect. So yeah, it's I call it the Cursed Cur now. I don't have a diminutive form of that or a nickname for it. It's just the Cursed Cur.
But it's quite interesting. And as you say during your introduction into this section about the object that you purchased, was this in North Carolina, I believe, you found this object was based?
Oh, it's a good question. It slips my mind where it was shipped from, but I think that's probably right. You're probably right. It was North Carolina.
Yeah.
I think that is right.
Yeah. And I did find that whole section amusing, that you were very impressed with this woman's rating on eBay, regardless of the fact that she was selling this purportedly cursed bulldog. And it's very interesting that she'd kind of said, oh, well, my family's never... Her introduction really did remind me of Gremlins for some reason, Jay.
It is. Her dad bought it somewhere in a Chinese antique store. Yeah, it's exactly the beginning of Gremlins.
So once again, showing my vintage. And so this package had arrived 4 days later. Were you nervous, Jay? As we say, we're trying to be quite standoffish about this subject, but I suppose, as you say, the psychological effect of, regardless of what you believe or the scientific method and people who just poo-poo this as superstition and nonsense, I suppose it's very different when you've actually crossed that boundary into the possession of an alleged cursed object.
Yeah, and I think there was 3 points where I got nervous. I think the first point was, I think 2 were irrational and 1 was rational.
Yeah.
So the first point was when I actually won. When I got that email, it said, you win this cursed object. I was like, oh, this thing is actually going to be sent to my house now. So I had to whatever. I have a wife and 3 daughters. So I was like, oh, now I brought the entire family into this project without them knowing about it. So that was the first time. So I was like, oh, it's done. It's irrevocable. I probably could go in there and cancel it, but I'm not going to, obviously. So it's irrevocable.
Yeah.
Then when I received it, right, and what the owner did was, besides that, really Gremlins-like backstory they gave it, and all the woes that their family had as a result of it financially, people died, there was all kinds of troubles. She sent me a note that, when it was going to arrive, she said, this is coming to you, may you get what you wish for, all those kinds of things. And then when it arrived in like a USPS flat rate box, very recognizable to us in the States, red, white, and blue. And she had written in pink marker all over it, warnings, may you get what you ask for, all these kind of warnings all over it. And that's the second time I got nervous, because it's in my house. I'm reading this warnings, not on a digital screen, but in ink that she'd written on a box that contained a cursed object. But it was about that time. What really sad for that part was I kind of realized finally what I'd bought. And I hadn't really bought a cursed object per se. What I'd bought, to her credit, not I don't mean she's scamming me. I mean, to her credit, what I bought was the experience of buying a cursed object.
Yeah.
So, she gave me all the ominous notes and kept up, she did everything I would want. Like if I just bought that thing and it got sent to me, no notes, no communication, just, 2 days later it shows up. That's not a good experience, right? It's not going into, the Chinese antique store, which is the experience we want, but we don't do that anymore. We just buy everything online. So she gave me that experience. That kind of helped me a little bit. Once I kind of talked myself into that rationalization, like, oh, she gave me an experience. Great. It's not actually cursed. But then the third time, I think the third bit of fear that I had about it was when I realized, well, I don't believe in cursed objects, but what if, just naturally, what if this thing is not cursed? And what if just it happened just by chance, something bad happened to me while I'm writing this book? What if I died? Or what if somebody close to me got hurt? Or what if I lost all my money? Or what if all these what ifs? I was nervous that it would go into my obituary, right? If I died while writing a book about cursed objects, especially if I had a cursed object in my house as a result, that would go in my obituary. It would suddenly become entwined in my life. It'd become like the most important thing in my biography, right? If you read my biography, it's like, and then bought a cursed object and died, right? That's the one people would focus on, which is what happened to almost everybody in this book. I mean, some of these people didn't even touch the cursed object or go near the cursed object and still they just wrote about it. There were journalists who just wrote about cursed objects. Ozzy the Iceman, I'm thinking.
Yes.
There's a person who just wrote about it, never got within 100 miles of it, and he died while writing about it. And that was enough to put him into the cursed story. I know, you can't dig up any information about this journalist other than he died writing about Ozzy. So that was a little bit of trepidation for me. I was like, man, did I just really taint my entire life? Any of my accomplishments, my family, my loves, my joys, my experiences, all are going to be like, one sentence, while the rest of it is like he bought a cursed object and died, as he should have for buying a cursed object. So that was my real fear. That was a rational fear I had throughout this entire project, honestly. Fortunately, nothing bad happened to me or anybody around me, but still, that could have happened. If you're a skeptic of cursed objects, that still could have happened. So I was a little bit trepidatious about that.
Yeah. Are you still taking it on family vacations?
No, just the one time, just that one time so I could have a more interesting story. Because you read it. If I hadn't have done something like that with it, and I took it to Florida with my family, the story would have just been he bought a cursed object. He hit a buy button and got a cursed object in his house. The end. So I had to start being a little bit more stunty with it, where I did take it to Florida on our vacation, put it in my luggage, flew down there, put it on my dresser in my rental place on the beach or whatever. And I vacationed with the cursed object at the end of the day.
Marvellous. I was just thinking about what would have happened if that had been pulled out of your luggage at some point, how you would have explained that away.
This big, if I walked through with a metal detector with a big brass dog in my pocket. Yeah. I don't know what I've done. I don't know. That's definitely a weird thing to explain. Why is there a brass dog in your pocket? I don't know, but it's not cursed. Just to take my word for it.
Honestly, you can trust me. Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, as you were saying, I'm very surprised that there aren't more books in regards to collecting as many of these cursed object experiences together, Jay. And it's really fascinating for me when I'm reading through them. And obviously, there are some that are extremely well known. Everybody's heard of Annabelle. Everybody's heard of the Hope Diamond. Otzi is one that I often find quite perplexing because that's a very strange one, because that seems to take a while to get going.
Yeah.
Some would say till he thawed out, really.
Yeah, and it's a human body. The first object is a human body.
Yeah, but there are several bits of people that have seemed to become cursed, and I know you touch on some that aren't. Obviously, the famous German vampire is a very famous curse. I mean, I was very surprised. I'm sure I'd seen that before, but it's one of those things that you see it and you go, oh, well, yeah, there's a decapitated head in a museum in somewhere. And you kind of put it to one side, Jane. You think, well, that seems perfectly normal in this day and age. But to reread that and to see Peter Curden's head is in a Ripley's somewhere in the States, I just find that incredible, really.
It is incredible because keep in mind, and you know this, but a Ripley's museum isn't like the British Museum. It's not like a Smithsonian. It's not this elegant scholarly place. It's a tourist attraction. At the end of the day, they're all real exhibits, but it's a tourist attraction. It's meant to bring in families and kids who are just tired from seeing Niagara Falls or going to a water park and just want to walk around weird stuff. And it's literally just on this hook, just spinning in a box for your entire family to see if you let them. But I like that one because the whole point. So Curden's head, which is not cursed. The whole point of it being in the book is I have a section where I say, why aren't these objects cursed? And they're all really disgusting objects or interesting objects. And my point was, one of the skeptical rejoinders to cursed objects is we kind of pick creepy stuff and just call it cursed. The reason why every doll is cursed is because it looks creepy, right? The reason why Otzi, the Iceman, seems cursed is because it's a creepy dead body, right? So my point was to say, no, that's not usually why we call something cursed, right? Here's an example of a serial killer's head, and it's not cursed. Here's an example of a book bound in human skin. It's not cursed. And on the other hand, here's a boring chair, and it's cursed. Here's a painting, right? A painting of a child, and it's cursed. So that was part of my motivation for putting that section in there. Wasn't just to fill out the pages. It was to prove that whatever goes into making a cursed object cursed, besides something cursing it, is we don't know, right? There's this why is the Hope Diamond a cursed object and not thousands of other famous diamonds that we know about? Why is that graveyard statue in Sleepy Hollow, New York, cursed and not the millions of other graveyard statues across the country. So there's something very specific and special about a cursed object and how it become one. So that was kind of the point there, is to say, hey, it's not just, we don't just call creepy things cursed because they're creepy, just like we don't always call haunted houses haunted because they're abandoned. It's because of something else, something not quite definable, something you can't quite put your finger on. And that's kind of part of the allure of a cursed object.
Yeah. I think what is also interesting as well is, and I would imagine you may have been quite surprised yourself doing this, Jay, is often with some of these objects that predate the internet's explosion over the last 20 years and YouTube and podcasts and things, I found it very interesting that certain objects that had a backstory and folklore and superstition behind it, some of them over the last 20 years seem to have grown into something completely different from what they were pre-internet. So were you surprised at the number of objects that seemed their story seems to have continued to grow, even though they are housed in a museum or locked away from public consumption? They are out of the way, and therefore their alleged cursed power is somehow suppressed.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because we know the internet, right? The internet speeds up life cycles, right? A book can go from obscurity to bestseller just from a few choice, posts on social media. We get tired of a topic in like a day on the internet and social media today, or we watch, we move on from content consumption, right? TV shows. You'll watch a TV show in one day, the entire season, and then you're on to the next one. Whereas back in the day, it would take you half a year to watch that entire season because it only comes out once a week and only during fall and that kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, the fact that we're not making cursed objects, famous cursed objects like crazy, like the internet's not a factory of cursed objects, is surprising to me. It's all the ones that stay famous are the ones that were already famous. Like, it's almost as if that's part of the proof is that they predate the internet. Not to say that we don't have cursed objects since the internet. In fact, we have, quite a few digital cursed objects in the world. But the fact that, again, you could post on Reddit or Twitter or TikTok or wherever some creepy looking doll, say it's haunted, get 1 million likes, and then suddenly you have a famous cursed object minutes later. It's not really how it works. It feels like it would work that way for somebody who's a little bit more cynical, but it's not. It's these time tested time tested artifacts most of them are in museums or in private collections. And to me, it's a testament to the cursed object. It was very hard for me to find. I think we have some 50 cursed objects in the book, and it was really hard for me to find those. I had to really dig, even though they're famous. I always compare it to haunted houses, right? If I would have written a book about haunted houses in the U.S., say, I would have needed 10 volumes to get all even the most famous ones in there. There's a bazillion famous ones. But with cursed objects, it's almost like there's some kind of filter that, you have to be pretty special to like achieve fame as a cursed object. It's an interesting phenomenon that I still haven't figured out. Why aren't there just 1 million of them, like 1 million famous ones? Anytime somebody posts on cursed images, why doesn't that immediately go into the canon as a cursed object? But so again, it's another nuance and special aspect of these cursed objects that they are kind of impervious to that and continue on and aren't just kind of lost in a wash of brand new famous cursed objects.
Yeah. I think probably the one I want to sort of start with, which I suppose is the elephant in the room for anybody that knows anything about cursed objects, and that's the Dybbuk Box, Jay.
Yes.
As someone who's a lover of Jewish folklore, the golem is probably, for me, the most underused character in all of horror cinema, and is long overdue. Right. Long overdue. Right. A great comeback, and is easily one of my favourite X-Files episodes. The one that features
it's a good one.
Yeah. The Dybbuk Box is, as I've just been referring to there, is probably one of those that's more famous due to the internet than many of the other ones, I would suggest.
Yeah, I would say that this is probably the most famous one of modern times. And it was an eBay article. It was another one that came off eBay, which is another kind of fact. So it's directly from the internet, almost, that it came out. This is a super fascinating one. This was another one where, they only wanted. So my publisher said I could do whatever I wanted with this book because they're great. Quirk's a great publisher, but they said you have to have Annabelle Lee in there, or the Annabelle doll in it. Annabelle Lee, it's not Poe. The Annabelle doll in there, and they strongly suggested the Dybbuk Box as well. The Dybbuk Box as well should be in there. So I didn't know much about the Dybbuk Box, actually. I'd heard of it. I knew kind of like the story of this box on the internet that's now in a museum. And I think at the time, this was about a few months, maybe a year after Post Malone got scared by it. And there was a viral video that went around of him getting scared of being in the room with the Dybbuk Box. So I knew that stuff, but I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what a Dybbuk was. I knew what a box was. So what surprised me is the first thing I did, because in this book, I'm telling both the supernatural stories and the actual stories. So the Hope Diamond, I tell a supernatural story, but I also start in India and the mines where it was found, the traders that took it, why they took it. So I had to find like the historical story as well. And when I typed in Dybbuk Box, but it's the first thing you always do, right, in researching, just to start things, is type it into Google. Mm-hmm. I typed in Dybbuk Box, and the only thing that came up was this one Dybbuk Box. There was no like history of Dybbuk Boxes, was nothing in the folklore encyclopedias about Dybbuk Boxes. And I found that really strange. So I kind of put it aside, and I kind of told the story of the Dybbuk Box, where it started on eBay, where it went to, where it ended up at. And I actually got to see this. I went to Zak Bagan's museum and saw the Dybbuk Box firsthand. And there's movies written about it. It's so famous. But in the end of the day, I think the person who posted it originally, first of all, I should go back. So there is a Dybbuk, right? It's a Jewish folklore entity. It's a definite thing.
Yes.
But they're not in boxes. They're not like genies. It's not like those kinds of things. It's just somebody put the word Dybbuk in front of box. And I think the person actually came out and said that, they had made up the concept, made up the entire backstory and that whole thing. But which is fascinating, it's disappointing at first, right? Because even skeptics don't like to be right sometimes. But it's fascinating because despite that, and it's really easy to find that online, to find that truth.
Yeah.
Despite that, people still want to call it cursed. So now the story is maybe it got cursed along the way. That's all they needed was this guy to start this idea, and now it's actually cursed. And when I saw it at Bagan's museum, it's got its own room, dark, moodily lit. There's a ring. It's in a case. There's a ring of salt around it. And when we looked at it, they pointed out that the ring of salt had been slightly broken and the door was slightly ajar, and that they had not done that. So it was actively trying to escape from its museum case. So again, the story becomes almost more fascinating than the idea of the curse. The story that, again, it was a completely fabricated concept. And in fact, it's not even a wine case. I think that's another one where like part of the story is it's a wine box, but really it turns out it's like a I can't remember what it was, some kind of like whiskey box that was made only recently.
Yeah.
But the story it's gathered to it, again, just being a physical object is all it had to be. That this physical object suddenly started winding the story around it. The story where it went to this eBay owner, then this eBay owner. And then, went to Zak Bagan's, and then scared Post Malone, and then became so famous that it became controversial, and then got a movie made out of it, partly produced by the people who own the box, and on and on. And suddenly it becomes interesting again. It goes from, oh, that's interesting. Oh, wait, no, it's not. It's fake. To, oh, wait, no, it's still interesting despite being fake. So it is a strange little box, that Dybbuk Box.
It is. It's almost as if it's created its own mythos, really, because, as you say, I was very aware of this chap saying, yeah, I just made it all up, it's all nonsense. And people were saying, oh, well, he's clearly too frightened to tell the truth. And so people had already created an answer in their head, which is one of those things when it comes to paranormal events. When somebody comes out and says, no, it's all nonsense, or I was lying, or I made it all up, they go, oh, they're probably too scared to tell the truth anymore.
Yeah, it's like almost like the story. The story is so powerful, they need that story. Because honestly, even as a believer, it'd be really easy to say, oh, Dybbuk Box is a fraud. Good thing we have these other 500,000 cursed objects. Like the existence of one fraud doesn't prove the existence of all frauds. So it's a really easy kind of mental decision to say, okay, that one is fake. This one's not over here. But they don't. The story is so good. The Dybbuk Box allure is so strong that it's hard to let go. And even me, again, you couldn't, if somebody came to me and said, you can't put the Dybbuk Box in that book because it's totally fake, I'd be like, I still want it in there. That's still a fascinating story. But you do have to acknowledge the fraudulent parts of it, but it's still a fascinating story. So, and now the punchline now is, if you go on eBay, there are a score of Dybbuk Boxes for sale online now. So this guy invented in a whole like niche of paranormal that didn't exist before.
Yeah. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, Jay, that someone decided to buy one off eBay and film their whole experience with it, and allegedly suffered for some severe paranormal repercussions from owning this Dybbuk Box. But once again, I think that ended up being some kind of, oh yeah, I've just done it for a laugh, none of it's true.
Yeah.
But it is. It's one of those things that you go back 20 years, there are no Dybbuk boxes.
Yeah.
Anywhere. You can't find them. They're not in literature. They're not in historical documents. They didn't exist.
Yeah, and I was very tempted. I didn't do it, but I found out later that a few ghost, haunted book writers do this. I was tempted to make up my own cursed object.
Yes.
Just fabricate it from the ground up. Just say, okay, now there is this vase in San Francisco that was once owned by, I could do whatever. I'm a writer. I can make up stuff. And just make it up and just see how many people, responded to it. Say, oh, I've heard of that. Or, yeah, that sounds right to me. Or it got, I think the highest compliment would be it getting included in the top 10 list online or whatever on YouTube. I didn't, for the record, I didn't do that. But, I have heard of like ghost writers or writers of ghosts doing that and just making up a haunted location just to see if if just to test people's, I guess, credibility or gullibility, I should say.
Yeah, well, I have to say that in my younger days, I used to be a licensee of a bar, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was often filled with musicians and people who wanted to follow musicians about. And often everybody would try and be super cool and talk about the latest bands and who was really cool and who was really hot. They'd always try and name the most obscure band to try and make themselves look cooler. So me and a couple of friends, we often used to make up bands just to see how many people had allegedly heard of these bands. And it's one of those things I still think about. It's like 20 odd years ago, Jay, and it still makes me chuckle. I never came across anybody who'd never heard of these bands. Everybody knew who they were. They were they were down with it.
I'm expecting like T-shirts to show up and that kind of thing walking to the bar. That'd be hilarious.
Well, if in those days I could have probably made a bomb. Actually, and looking back, I probably missed out on some income streams there. Thanks for pointing that out, Jay.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'll let you off. And so visiting Zak Bagan's museum. Now I know a few people that have been, and everybody I know's been, regardless of Zak's persona or public perception of what people may think of him, because Zak is a very divisive person, for better or worse out there. And this is certainly not any personal interpretation of that subject. I'm just saying it as it is. I think he's one of the most decisive people out there. People either love him or hate him due to his success, I would suggest, Jay. And I found that everybody, regardless of their opinion of Ghost Adventures or wherever, whenever they've gone there, everybody says it's amazing. They think it's fantastic. They find it deeply interesting. Yes, there's a lot of theatrics going on there, but there is a lot of interesting aspects to it. How did you find it?
Yeah, I think I agree with your friends or the people you've talked to. So I'm not a fan of Zak's. I'm not an anti-fan either. I just, whatever. I just not interested in his kind of brand of what he offers. So I was thinking it would be cheesy, right? It's a guy who got famous yelling at ghosts and rich enough that he could buy stuff and stick into a Las Vegas house, which is what he did. And I was like, I wasn't expecting much. I was expecting, a lot of melodramatic stories around very boring objects. And what I got was an experience that was deeply, deeply unsettling. And I've heard people say that same phrase and then say, because they were disgusted by his museum. I just think it's so well done. So he has probably two or three different kind of veins of objects in that museum. He has cursed and haunted objects for sure. That he displays melodramatically, lights them very well. That's very well done aesthetically. It's very well done. It's what you want. It's like dark and spooky and moody. So he has those. He has a few funhouse kind of funhouse kind of angles where there's like literally you'd walk through like a clown town and like a little person dressed as a clown would jump out of a box at you and scare you, that kind of thing. So he actually had like a funhouse element to it.
Yeah.
And then he had murderabilia. He had actual artifacts. These aren't paranormal artifacts. These are just artifacts related to serial killers and tragedies.
Yeah.
He had Ed Gein's cauldron, which they called a cursed object, actually. They had Jack Kevorkian's van. They had stuff from Michael Jackson. They had anybody that ended, ignobly or bad. Sharon Tate's wedding dress. They had actual serial beds from serial killers that they had kept their victims on. He had some really disturbing artifacts. So it's calling it a haunted museum is almost inaccurate. It's almost a museum. It's almost like the Museum of Death. Have you ever heard of that one? There's one in Las Vegas, and I think there's one in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's more like that, where it's literally, you know, the most famous tragedies in the world. He has pieces of, and we know Zak Bagan's. There's like a press release every 3 weeks. We have this new murder house he bought, or this new like, murder weapon, or anything dark and like murderabilia-ish he's bought. So he had like Charles Manson. He had ashes from Charles Manson. He had like Robert Rodriguez's glasses. So that was the part that was disturbing, but all of it was really well done. I mean, you come out of that museum thinking, which is ideally what you come out of a museum doing.
Mm.
And from that perspective, I have to say it's a success. It's, again, highly disturbing. There was a time in my tour, so you have to take a tour through it. You can't go by yourself.
Yeah.
Somebody actually backed out of the tour, like halfway through. She just couldn't do the next room. And they tell you at each room, listen, you're about to see something disturbing. You don't have to go in if you want. You can stay out here and stay to the next thing. And the next thing is less disturbing. And this person went into a room. It actually wasn't even a murder scene. It was a doll with a spirit box on it, with flashing lights, and it was a very oppressive room, and there was about 100 dolls in there surrounding this one doll that was spotlighted. And it was a really, you know, again, as a skeptic, it still was like distressing to be in that room.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't take it after that. They had to get escorted out of the tour, out of the building. So it's effective. It is effective. Again, you can argue whether it's effective in the right way or not, but man, I was impressed by that museum against all of my preconceptions. So you can take that for what it's worth, but I was impressed.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things as well. And I think it's very, you know, as you referred to there, I think Zak Bagans has had a little bit of criticism in regards to some of the objects he's had because they are from serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, you look at podcasts, Jay, true crime podcasts are some of the most grotesque and terrifying content you could wish to listen to. And they are wildly successful all around the world.
Yes.
You know, and I know the other week people were joking about this Zodiac break in the case, and everybody said, "Oh, every true crime podcast in the world will be rushing out to do a new episode about Zodiac," and it's remarkable as someone that has an interest in serial killers, primarily because I can't get my head around it. I can't get my head around what makes somebody feel like that, regardless. Yeah,
and I'm with you on that. I like true crime stuff in the sense of, you know, I wrestle with it, right? So anytime I write about it, I'm almost apologetic. There's some part of me that feels guilty for being interested in it. Yeah. And most podcasts I listen to they don't have that sense of guilt or shame about it. It's very gleeful, these true crime podcasts. So, you know, it's a topic you have to deal with. So you can almost say that Zak Bagans is being way more honest about the topic than your average true crime podcast, because those true crime podcasters get on, they joke around, they kind of like are enthralled by the details, edge of their seat, you know, entertained by it. And Zak Bagan says, "Oh yeah, well here's the bloody shirt from the victim." So yeah. what do you say to that? So it's definitely more in your face and aggressive and uncomfortable. But again, it's murder. It should be uncomfortable.
Yeah, very much so. I know as you mentioned that other venue. Is that the one where they've actually got some of the beds from the Heaven's Gate house? I don't know if they have that, but what it was actually a serial killer I didn't know about, and it was probably one of the more aggressive exhibits he had, because this killer would strap people to bed for long periods of time, blind them by injecting, not to take the podcast down, but by injecting bleach into their eyes, I believe. Yeah. And then, you know, torture them. And he had pictures of the victims in situ. So the serial killer would take pictures of the victims. He had those on the walls. He had the actual bed, one of the beds that they were strapped to with stains all over it. It was, let's say it made that story very, very real to me. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is remarkable. I've seen documentaries and things, you know, when you talk about John Wayne Gacy, he ended up becoming an artist and selling his art from prison, and people were paying thousands for it. It's incredible how much this murderabilia seems to really excite a certain section, and like I say, I think it's a stick that's used to beat Zak with, but if anything, he's probably giving it a more respectful, nuanced approach, because it's not as easily accessible, if you know what I mean, Jay.
Yeah, no, totally. You have to go there with a purpose, basically.
Yes.
And again, you're going to come out of there, I think, feeling the right feelings, feeling disgusted by Zak too. That's fine. Disgusted by what you saw, by the fact of it, the history of it, by the person who collected it all in a building for you, by yourself for going there, hopefully. But again, that should be our response to crimes and tragedies is, I don't know what to do with this feeling. It makes me sick inside, and definitely shouldn't make you gleeful and want to, I don't know. I don't know. Different people react to things different ways, obviously. So I don't want to put anybody in a box. Yeah. But it's definitely, again, it's the point of museums is to educate and impact and affect and make you think. And his does that. Yeah. With strobe lights.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I suppose, in a way, that would be job done, because if you come out of there feeling repulsed and odd and finding things difficult to get your head round, then that's probably what he wants you to feel like, rather than coming out going, wow, that was amazing. He wants you to feel disturbed.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I mean, John Wayne Gacy, that was the clown guy, right? He was dressed as a clown. So that's easy to make jokes out, right? Make a joke out of that in a second, really. Mm. But then again, it's really easy to take the strange bits and hide from the uncomfortable bits. But again, you can't do that when the physical objects are right in front of you. Same with cursed objects, right? You could be real blithe about that, but sitting with a dog, this brass dog on your desk, makes you ask yourself some questions.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about cursed objects, one of the strangest aspects of some of these is there's quite a few of these in the States, and not so many in the UK. I certainly can't think of anything that's a direct parallel. And there are certain graveyards in the US, Jay, where you've got statues on graves that have this reputation of being cursed, and there's 2 or 3 famous ones. I'm trying to think of there's one in one graveyard where if you touch it, people die, that kind of, which makes you think, well, why is it still there? Which is one of those things where you're thinking, well, if you touch it and die, how do people know it's deadly? But
yeah.
One of the ones you touch on was something I was never aware of, never heard of this at all in my life, which is the Black Aggie.
This is a great one. This is one of my favorite stories of all time, because it starts around where I used to be from the DC area. I grew up there before I moved up to New England, so it's a local legend for me. But it's also an example, and I'm glad you introed it the way you did, because it's an example of them getting rid of the statue because of all the lore around it. So what it was the Black Aggie was a funeral statue. It was, life-size figure wrapped in a cloak, non-gendered, with their arm up on their face, very and like almost like a thoughtful pose. It was in a graveyard in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area, Baltimore, Maryland, called Druid Hill Cemetery. And they called it the Black Aggie because it was black. I think it had some corroded green on it as well, but it was blackish. And the name on the pedestal was Agnes, because it was and that got changed into Aggie. And that Agnes, and that Black Aggie, actually the name got so popular that you'll find multiple statues across the country called Black Aggie, even though there's no Aggie on the grave at all. So it just became a name that got kind of passed across the states. Yeah. But anyway, so it is the grave of a general from the Civil War named Felix Agnes. He wanted something cool for his grave, got with a sculptor. Turns out, though, that they ripped off one of the most famous funeral statues of all time, the Adams Memorial, which is about an hour west in D.C., in a cemetery in D.C., Rock Creek Cemetery. And the Adams Memorial was made by a famous historian named Henry Adams. Yep. He was in the famous Adams family that America has. I think we had 2 presidents who were Adams and various famous politicians and stuff. He was in that family. He was wealthy. He was a writer and historian, though. He wasn't a politician. But he came home one day to his house in D.C., and his wife, Clover Adams, had committed suicide. She drank photography chemicals. She was a photographer, and she drank the chemicals. This was in the 19th century. So he immediately wanted to, do something for the grave. And so he got with one of the most famous sculptors in the U.S., Augustus St. Gaudens, who was an Irish-born sculptor in the U.S. What Henry Adams told him was, make me something that looks mysterious and thoughtful, something that represents the mysteries of death. Don't give it a name. We're not going to name it. It needs to stay ethereal and just makes people think of death and the strangeness of it. And they came up with this figure. It's a beautiful statue. It's still there in Rock Creek Cemetery. And it's, again, it's a figure with a cloak around it. And it's beautiful. It's been called the best funerary art sculpture in the country. And I agree with that. It's amazing. It's so amazing, in fact, that there's a copy of it in the Smithsonian itself, in the Museum of Art in D.C. Got its own like little wing. You walk down it. There's like a mural behind it of a graveyard, and it's just sitting there. That's how much of a work of art it is. It's sitting a copy of it is sitting in the Smithsonian.
Wow.
But anyway, Felix copied, and it was famous. People came from all around. It was a very, very famous grave. And then, of course, Felix and his sculptor copied it. We don't know if they did it on purpose or which one did it. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it was a big enough copy that, it was a controversy in the art world. By the time that they copied it, John Adams had also died and was buried underneath the original. The sculptor, St. Gaudens, was gone as well. So the only one left, I think, was the widow of St. Gaudens. And she threatened to sue, and it became a big thing in the papers. But somehow he was allowed to keep his Black Aggie. And it wasn't called that, of course, back then. Died, was buried under it, worked out. He got a really cool piece of art that he got buried under. But then in the 1970s, almost like 100 years later, maybe less than that, it started getting a reputation there in Baltimore as, a deadly statue. If you touched it, you died. If a pregnant woman walked through its shadow, she would die. There were rumors of it calling all the ghosts in the cemetery to it every night. Yeah. So there was at one point somebody attacked it with a hacksaw. He wanted to cut off its arm. Turns out he picked the wrong statue. There's another statue nearby that looks it's a female statue with its arm out.
Yeah.
He was found drunk in his car with a hacksaw the next day. But anyway, it got so bad. So there's lots of like stories with that kind of like teenagers staying overnight with it, that kind of thing. But it got so bad that the cemetery was like, we have to get rid of the statue. We got to get rid of it. It's a nuisance. People are like trespassing and possibly dying because of it. So they got rid of the statue, I think along with the Agnes family's permission. Yeah. They got rid of it. If you go there today, this pedestal is still there. It's like a giant kind of almost cement throne. It's not like literally a throne, but it's shaped like it's got a base and a big back. And the word Agnes is right there on it. So that's still there today. But the statue they decided to donate to the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian was like, okay, we'll take it, I guess. And then they just put it away in storage. They didn't want it out. They didn't like it. They knew its history, its provenance. So they just put it in storage. And then one day, I want to say maybe 20 years ago, I'm not real sure, like when in modern times for sure. One of the most boring divisions in the government, I can't remember the name of them, but they're responsible for just like sourcing paper clips and pencils for all the offices. Yeah. They needed a decoration for a courts building in D.C. And the Smithsonian was like, hey, we got this thing down here. Do you want this? Because we don't want it. And they're like, yeah, we'll take that. It's like, we need that. It's like we have this little garden in front of the court system and make a great little decoration. So they put it out there, and it's out there today. If you go to the McKay, I think it's the Howard T. McKay Court Building, it's right there. It's by a tree. It's the Black Aggie, the cursed object itself sitting there. And if you take 2 steps to the left, you'll see that its neighbor is the White House. Just across Lafayette Square is the White House. So it's neighbors. But even more interesting, about a quarter of a mile away in the other direction is the site where Clover Adams killed herself. So somehow she, this fraudulent piece of art that went on to become a monster and a boogeyman for all the kids in Baltimore is now, just a few hundred feet away from the site where it all started, where Clover Adams drank the photography chemicals. So really just a bizarre twist. And I love it because, again, I'm from D.C. But then one day I moved to New Hampshire about 10, 12 years ago to New England. And it turns out there's a copy up here as well, because St. Gaudens eventually opened a studio in New Hampshire that today is like a historic park, national park. Oh. You can go there, and there's a copy of the Black Aggie / Adams Memorial sitting right there in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So again, I just love all the twists and turns now, and I love the look of it. It's a beautiful piece of art. Even the copy is beautiful. So it's just a statue that has seen some times for sure. And if anything's cursed, it is.
And I suppose some people say that they find it extremely ironic that this copy seems to have found its way close to the source of the story in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. The source today, so the house is no longer there, but on the site is a hotel named after the Adams family. It's called the Hayes Adams Hotel because it was on the site of 2 houses. And inside they tell the story of the Adams family, of the Hayes family. Some people say the ghost of Clover Adams walks the halls. But it doesn't tell you that just a couple hundred feet away is the Black Aggie, which I wish it would.
Yeah. How strange. That's one of those strange footnotes in some of these stories, Jay, that it seems peculiar that it seems to have ended up so close to what caused it.
I know. It's one of those stories that it sounds almost written, but isn't. It's just a bunch of random bounces of the ball.
Yeah. Well, talking of writing, the next alleged cursed object I want to touch on is something that has a wonderful story, even though there doesn't seem to be much provenance to it. But I'm not a big believer in coincidence, and when you read this, you begin to scratch your chin and think, I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the ring of Silvanius.
Yes.
Which was dug up in Silchester in Hampshire, over here in the UK, towards the end of the 18th century. So tell us about this unusual ring.
This is another story where you're like, as you tell it, you're like, nah, no way. That's not true. That can't be it. That can't be right. And then the twist is like so good. I love it. So like you said, it's a ring. It's a gold ring. That was just dug up by a farmer over there. You guys, I think you guys do this all the time, just like farmers digging up ancient artifacts that date back to Roman times. I'm a big fan of the show The Detectorists. Did you watch that?
Yeah.
So like that's kind of what I think of. I feel like just people are just accidentally kicking up treasures as they walk around England, the English countryside. But this one actually started that way. Just some farmer actually dug it up while he was plowing his field. And it's a gold ring. It's a signet ring meant to press wax seals. So there's an image of a god on it that's backwards. There's a name on it called Synesius, I believe is the name, or I think there's a syllable I'm missing in there. And there's like a blessing on the ring as well. It's like God keep you, Synesius. And it's meant to, it's backwards so you can press it into wax, and then the wax impression is forward, and you can seal an envelope. So whatever, it's a ring. Whatever, the farmer found it. I think he sold it to a rich family nearby that had an estate. And then something was found not too far away in an archaeological site that was a Roman temple, I think, to the god Nodens. It's called Dwarf Hill was the name of the site. And while they were there, they dug up a defixio, which is a curse tablet. So a curse tablet is a small metal tablet, usually lead, thin, very thin, that you would write a curse on. So basically somebody would go to the Temple of Nodens and say, I want to curse somebody. Here's some money. You had to donate some money to get this thing. Here's some money, and let's write the curse down. And then you gave that curse tablet to the god as an offering. And hopefully whoever you cursed got cursed. And there's tons of them. There's defixionis all over England, all over Europe, I think, in fact.
Yeah.
So it's not like a rare thing. But this particular one they found on Dwarf Hill mentioned the name of Synesius, the same name as the ring, and mentioned a stolen gold ring. Now this, like you say, sounds coincidental. Here are two artifacts that are hundreds of years old, found in two separate places that might be connected. Because again, Synesius isn't like John Smith. It's not a super common name. Yeah. So once these two objects were found, the stories that people came up with them are really plausible, honestly. So the story is that, the person who bought the curse tablet their name is also on the tablet. It's Silvianus. So it's a little confusing story because it's Silvianus and Synesius, the Romans, But Silvianus, the idea is that maybe Synesius stole the ring from Silvianus. So Silvianus cursed him with the curse tablet to get that ring back. Could have been that it was originally Synesius's ring, lost it in the card game, because at these temples, it wasn't just worshiping going on. You were going to the bath, you were doing activities, you're doing those kinds of things. So maybe, Synesius, it was Synesius's ring earlier, lost it in a bet to Silvanius, and still ran off with it, wouldn't give it to them. Yeah. Which again, sounds again, kind of plausible. But the next twist of that story is that there is a mistake in the engraving on the ring of Synesius. There's a misspelling on it. And again, this is a metal ring engraving. So the idea was that Synesius knew he just stole this ring, or didn't give the ring away, from this temple where you make curses. So he knew he was about to get cursed. Yep. So as soon as he could, he found an engraver to engrave that inscription, a blessing inscription, God keep you, to counteract this curse that he knew was being made. And it was engraved so fast, this blessing was engraved so fast that a mistake was made. So there's all these connections that make this a really interesting story. And today, these two artifacts tell us entire story of a guy cursing another guy for stealing his ring. And then there's another twist, and you're like, stop with the twist. There's no way it's all true. The next twist is that there was an archaeologist investigating the Nodin Temple archaeological site, Dwarf Hill, and he wanted to know more about Nodin. And Nodin was an Anglo-Saxon god. So he needed an expert in Anglo-Saxon to learn more about Nodin and to decipher some inscriptions and such. So he called up Oxford, right? Oxford is where all the brains in England are. So he called up Oxford and it's like, I need an expert in Anglo-Saxon to come look at some stuff for me and tell me about Nodin. So he got one. He got an expert in Anglo-Saxon to come to him. And that expert was a man named John Randall Rule Tolkien, JRR Tolkien, the JRR Tolkien of Hobbit fame. So the idea is, again, about a year or two later, JRR Tolkien will come out with a story about a cursed gold ring after going to the site where this Fictionis was that implied that this other ring was this other gold ring was entirely cursed. So we might have one of the most famous stories in all the Western world only because of a cursed object. It was found in a field by a farmer. And I think that's fascinating. If you go to Silchester today, I think that ring is still on display at a local museum. I think the estate was turned into a museum. And beside it, they have an actual original first printing of The Hobbit to kind of connect that story. So it's not just like a random internet rumor that somebody put together. This is something that's actually kind of played with by all sides. So again, all started with a cursed ring, which could be the most boring cursed artifact out there, a ring that's cursed. And here we go into this massive chase from a temple all the way to inspiring, Gandalf the Great.
Well, it is one of those things like you say, because obviously Tolkien went out there a couple of years before The Hobbit was released. And obviously here we are talking about a ring and an area that was known as Dwarf's Hill. And obviously anybody that's read The Hobbit will know that there are a lot of dwarves in it, which is one of the key changes to The Hobbit, to The Lord of the Rings. There's a far greater number of dwarves in that one than there is in the sequel. But these Defixiums, I've always found these quite amusing as well, Jay, because they're basically, as you say, they're quite common and they can be found everywhere. I know the southeast of the UK, they seem to turn up all the time. They're found in walls and old bathhouses and things like that. And I found it quite interesting that they eventually worked out that the Romans, basically people would have stalls where you would have a curse and a space for the name. So you could just basically go to this stall and say, right, I'd like this curse that's going to make this person's bum fall off. Or
it's like a curse vending machine. Is that what it's like?
And they'd say, right, what's his name? And so it's Julius. So then they'd just engrave Julius onto it, and you would take this curse. They'd have them pre-prepared.
That's so good. Yeah, and they also sometimes they'd have illustrations on them, because once I found the Silvanius ring, I went down a whole wormhole of Defixions because I was like, oh, those are cursed objects. I should talk more about them. But there's too many of them, first off.
Yes.
And the other thing is, some of them actually have pictures drawn of what they want done to the cursed victim. I think there's one where there's a monster standing on top of a guy that's bound. His arms and legs are bound. So they got pretty vindictive with their curses.
Yeah. I know some of the I think some of the Greek ones were just basically they'd say things like, I hope he burps a lot in court, or he trips up and hurts his head. Just silly ones as well, you know what I mean? But they are they're one of those things, like you say, that they're very common, and I think not a lot of people know about them. And then when you find out about them, you realise just how widespread they are, because they're found in Germany, in France, in Spain, Greece, obviously, Italy, all over the place. Here in the UK, like I say, the southeast of the UK. The southwest even. They are everywhere. Bath and Gloucestershire and places around there. They just turn up in great big clumps.
Yeah, and that combined with what you told me, it gives me this amazing image of it being a bureaucratic activity where it's almost like filling out a form.
Yes.
It's like, I need to do a curse tablet, so I have some red tape to cut and some payments to make and a form to fill out in triplicate, and I have one. So it's really, really cool.
I mean, when you were compiling this collection for us, was there anything that surprised you, or one that made you pause for thought, Jay, and think, I think there might be a little bit more to this than meets the eye, rather than a lot of these, as we've said, some of them are just superstitious and some of them just seem to be flights of fancy, but often you can occasionally read some and you think, I wonder. Yeah,
so for me, it'd be the ones with giant body counts. Those are the ones where you're like, that's a big body count. I think the ones with the biggest body count that we have on record, at least, are probably they're going to be Otzi, the Iceman. I think his body count is 13 to 16 right now.
Yeah.
And some of those people died. I think the person that found Otzi was a hiker. I think maybe a German hiker. He was a hiker, And he ended up dying near the spot where he found Otzi, like years and years later. So that one's the one I was like, oh, there's a lot of deaths there. The other one that had a lot of deaths, which one was that one? Tutankhamun, that's the other one. The most obvious one. I can't believe it. Like, I flipped my mind. The Tutankhamun curse is also it's like tons of people, and the way he was found and the way the guy who funded the dig died. Those are the ones where I'm like, at some point, if it has a body trail that long, you have to like give it more of a birth than if it just killed 3 people, say. Or in that case, like the Ring of Silvanius, where it really only targeted 1 person. So, those two, the King Tut tomb and Otzi, both those, which I guess just dead bodies are what the ones I give the most credence to. Yeah,
and Tutankhamun, of course, the curse even took down a dog, by all accounts.
Yes. Nobody's safe. So I realize it's on display for everybody to see, but still, both of those are actually.
Yes, I remember the first time I went to see that, Jay, and I was well aware of its history. And as you say, it's one of those things that you go in there thinking, well, I know that he cut himself shaving in a foreign country and got malaria. It's easy, it gets infected. These things happen. Everybody smoked like chimneys and drank like fishes back in those days. I'm surprised anybody made it to 50. Nobody knew about, inoculation and vaccination. So you'd have loads of poorly exercised Englishmen wandering around Egypt in 110 degree heat. You start to think, well, maybe it might be not that frightening. And then when you get in front of it and you're like, wow, because it's just jaw dropping when you see it in real life. It's incredible.
Yeah, and if anybody could have cursed something, the ancient Egyptians could have pulled it off, right? Of all the people in the world, in the history of the world, they're the ones that could have pulled off a cursed object for sure.
No, very true. I mean, they had a tradition, as we were talking about the tablets with the Ring of Silvanius, that the Egyptians often would inscribe curses on tablets of clay, and then they would smash them up and put them under pyramids because they wanted their enemy to smother and suffocate. So once again, it goes back to that. I think one of the other outstanding aspects of your book, Jay, is the wonderful illustrations that litter many of the stories you cover, which I think is done by a gentleman called John McNair.
Yes.
They are marvellous. So when John was doing the illustrations, did you tell him which ones you wanted him to do, or did he just kind of have a look at it and think, well, I'd like to do this one and that one?
Well, the process is... I get together with the editor and we kind of decide on them, and then we have to decide who gets full page treatment. Like there's some illustrations in here that are, like the Black Aggie illustration is one of my favorites in the entire world. It takes up an entire page. He's got monsters all over the statue. It's a whole scene.
Yes.
And then there's others that are called, I guess, spot illustrations, where it's just the object on a background of white and it's not as intricate. So it's really me and the editor picking them, but then it's really up to John to interpret them. So obviously these are a little bit easier because they're real art. All of these are real artifacts, so he can just look up what they actually look like and then interpret them in the way he wants to. But yeah, that's one of my favorite things. The illustrations, his work. If you see his work outside of the Cursed Objects book, it's amazing. It's like he has a very weird aesthetic and does some very weird stuff. But that's one of my favorite things is somebody took the time to draw this. And I think the French version of the book goes with actual literal photos. I think probably because I don't know how they skirted copyright issue, because that's another thing we got to skirt by doing illustrations is we didn't have to get permission from museums and owners and to use photos of their stuff. But the French version did all photos, and that's interesting too, because I think that's one of the criticisms of the English version is that people wanted to see people got this cool illustrations, but then they wanted to see what they look like in real life. So they'd have to Google, okay, what does the Bassano vase look like in real life? What does the Conjuring chest look like in real life? So that is true, but I still like the illustrations. There's something about an artist doing stuff to that I fascinate, that I love. Especially right now, I'm writing a book about cryptids, and that is another situation where the artists, we pick out the cryptids we want illustrated, and then the artist has to, in that case, really interpret them because there's no photos of cryptids, no real photos of cryptids. So it's going to be really exercises of imagination on their part to make those.
Fantastic. Well, you've kind of negated my next point. I was going to say, obviously, this project's clearly a labour of love for you, and it's like, as I said to you at the beginning, it's a wonderful collection done with a real panache and dash of wit and humour throughout. And I really enjoy it, Jay. And I think anybody who doesn't have this book, it's worth it just to get a concise collection of these numerous objects together.
Yeah, and I always say, because Quirk, you mentioned Quirk earlier, so they're the publisher, and they have a very interesting philosophy about books, is they try to make every book kind of an object of art.
Yes.
So it's not just, I have I have nonfiction books that are mostly just my words, some photos, but in this case, they designed it to be almost like a gift book, is what they kept calling it, where like,
yeah,
you would like getting this book even if you never read it. You just put it on your shelf or on your table. And it's got the shiny cover and the illustrations, and even if you didn't read a single word, it's worth it just for the book itself, just for the aesthetic of the book. So they do that with all their books. They're really, really great job of like making this book more than the sum of its parts. And most of the time books, you're really only buying it for the words.
Yeah.
But they really give it that bigger oomph by designing it into like a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned there, that's a very exciting thing. So obviously my next question was what your next project could possibly be. So cryptids, and I know you've just said something very controversial there, that there's no photos of them, which, being a big believer in Bigfoot, Jay, I will call you out on. But
sure.
So when you've got, this is a very similar situation. Probably, I would say this one's harder to kind of get around than cursed objects, because you say there is a limited number of these official cursed objects, whereas cryptids, I think when you really delve into it, they're all over the place, aren't they?
Yeah. I think for like I said, I think there's around 50 cursed objects, and in cryptids so far, I think we have around 70. But here's the thing: so the way we found our way around that, I think my big tagline for this is, I'm going to say, if you buy this book, you're guaranteed to see a cryptid, because the angle on it isn't just the cryptid stories themselves. Because again, I'm a guy obsessed with physical objects.
Yes.
So really, the most of the cryptids we highlighted were cryptids who are celebrated in some way, either through statues or plaques or festivals or some physical, like, some town has turned it into their mascot, ball teams, museum exhibits. So really, when I say guaranteed to see a cryptid, whatever, you'll go to Point Pleasant and see the Mothman statue in the Mothman Museum, or the Gloucester sea serpent statue in Gloucester, Massachusetts. So that's kind of how, there's there's 1,000 cryptid encyclopedias out there. This isn't just their stories. This is almost like a travel log and a travel guide to where you can see really cool cryptid, where cryptids are celebrated in the country.
Yeah, I do find that interesting. I absolutely love cryptids. It's my main thing, Jay, I have to say.
Oh, cool.
And I find it very interesting. I've spoken to several of the world's most famous cryptozoologists doing this show. It's one of the privileges of doing this show, is being able to speak to these people who go out hunting Bigfoot and the Yeti and Nessie and all sorts. And I find it very interesting, especially in America, that, as you say there, Point Pleasant has fully embraced Mothman completely. And you can go there, you can see that wonderful statue in the town centre, the museum. And yet there are other cities and towns in America where something's happened in the last 50 years and they don't really like to talk about it. And then you go somewhere like Folk in Arkansas, where the Beast of Boggy Creek is. It's another one that's fully embraced it, because at the end of the day, it's a very small town on a road. And if it wasn't for the Beast of Boggy Creek, with the greatest of respect to the people of Folk, unless you live there, you probably wouldn't. Here I am. I've known where Folk, Arkansas is since I saw the Beast of Boggy Creek when I was 9.
Yes.
To know that, and the fact that film has had such a resonance through generations with people, Jay, I find it really interesting that there are certain towns in rural America that have really embraced this. Van Meter is another one, which is another fabulous story. And obviously I've had the pleasure of speaking with Chad Lewis and done a whole episode on the Van Meter visitor. So it's great, isn't it?
Like I would say, like the Flatwoods monster, right?
Yeah.
I would never, ever, ever have gone to Flatwoods, West Virginia, if that monster was in there. The reason why I really love it is because I don't know how it is in the UK, but in America, usually the personality of the town is shown by what sports team it likes the best. So everybody's wearing like the logo of the local sports team. That's how you know you're in Boston, because everybody's wearing a Patriots hat or a Red Sox hat.
Yeah.
These towns have a different kind of mascot and a different story behind that. And that's what I really love. I love it that there's like Bluff Creek has embraced Bigfoot so much. There's statues everywhere. And I even go so far as, even if it's not a real cryptid, there's like a town in Minnesota that just decorates everything with gnomes, just gnomes everywhere.
Yes.
So they belong in the book because they are, again, choosing a monster to represent them as opposed to the local baseball team or whatever. So I know, I love that. I love giving me a reason to come to your town. I really am a big fan of that. So then elsewhere in the book, I do pitch So if there's a bunch of interesting stories of cryptids that aren't celebrated, that I pitch why they should be celebrated. Why a town should grab this cryptid. Either it's unique, it's different, it's got a great story behind it, it represents a certain point of their history, that they really should be doing more with it and not burying it in their history.
Absolutely. Oh, that sounds fantastic. I really look forward to that. So when can we expect that to hit the shelves?
That's next year. That's next fall probably, or next summer. I can't remember. That's coming out. I write novels as well. I have one of those coming out, but nonfiction wise, that's coming out, I think, August of 2022. So far away, but not really.
Yeah. Fabulous. Well, hopefully I look forward to getting hold of a copy of that, and we'll have a chat about that sometime in the future if you're up for that.
Yeah. No, I'm sure Quirk will let you have it for sure.
Well, listen, Jay, where can everybody get hold of this wonderful Cursed Objects book and follow your work online?
You can find it anywhere. It's everywhere books are sold. So your favorite independent, Amazon, if it's easier for you. If you want more specific directions, or you want to learn more about the cursed objects, I did a few blog posts on my website of cursed objects that I didn't include, as well as kind of sidebars about curses that I didn't include, that didn't make it in the final cut. So if you go to my website, oddthingsi'veseen.com, there's a bunch of articles there. And also most of my travels to weird stuff across the world is on oddthingsi'veseen.com. So that's where you can find all my books, all my adventures, all my writings right there.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fabulous to dive into a couple of these frightening objects. And as we started the conversation saying that we tend to treat these objects fairly dismissively, I think it's very different when you're in the presence of them in real life, Jay. And it's very interesting how the psychological impact of such things can really change you. So thank you for giving everybody a bit of a creep in Halloween. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.